I'm probably looking a bit tired under the eyes, puffy. I've been quite unwell for 2 weeks, yo-yoing with some kind of virus. Anyhow, trust. That's the big thing at present. We don't seem to be able to trust. Multiculturalism doesn't help. I know that's not a good thing to say, but that's the situation. Now, trust is low because there's profound shifts in values in society. Younger people tend to operate on emotion, not that it didn't happen before, but in regard to Israel and Palestine and those issues. I came across a really good commentary on this. I haven't listened to it completely as I've been unwell. It's 15 minutes. But the essential point was on empathy, not so much trust. When someone has something bad happen to them, but they're basically a good person, men and women have empathy for them. But when someone who's a bad egg does something wrong and something happens to them, let's say something happens to someone that's a bad egg, that's a better way to put it. Yes, that's the way to put it. Men will not have sympathy for them if they are not nice people. And it may be their fault that something bad has happened. Women, on the other hand, will have sympathy for a bad egg, a bad person, if something unpleasant happens to them, irrespective of their history, their personality. Now, that's a big, big issue if it's true, because it's got ramifications for the Middle East. That's why we're judging people on the number of babies killed, although we don't know how many babies have been killed, in determining who's right and wrong. We have empathy for the Palestinians because their babies are dying, not whether they're nice people or not. That's the big issue. I've been reminded of some, let's say, ethical issues which I'd kind of forgotten about. Sometimes we judge people on their motivation, whether they're good or bad. Sometimes we judge people on the outcomes of what they do. I guess the classic situation would be a person claims to be able to cure cancer, and they've got this special liquid and they put it in the water supply. They intend to clear up everyone's cancer, but instead just the opposite occurs. Anyone that drinks the contaminated water has a much greater chance of dying of cancer. So the person's intention was to cure cancer, but in consequence, the water supply was contaminated, so a lot more people got cancer. You could exaggerate and say everyone got cancer that drank water from that water supply. That would make it a bit more, let's say, stark, black and white. So I've been puzzled by why people can't see the Israeli side, why they just focus on the Palestinians. And when they talk about genocide, Hamas and Iran have policies of genocide, of extinction of the nation of Israel and the people in it. Israel has no policy of extinction of any country nearby and their population. They are, according to me, generally reacting and occasionally preempting what is going to happen so that they can protect their country. Itchy eyes. I've met and I've had a girlfriend that was Jewish. People are going to be different, even from the same religious background. But I have struck Jewish people that struck a hard bargain and are quite pushy. I had a girlfriend that wasn't like that. She was very pleasant. But she wasn't too bright, which is unusual because we usually associate Jewish people with being pretty intelligent. But I think her problem was her mother drank during pregnancy and she had fetal alcohol syndrome. It didn't affect her looks, and she was quite beautiful, but it did affect her mentally. She wasn't mentally defective, but I'd say she was in the bottom 20% of the population. Retardation, though it didn't show up definitely. You just realize this person, when she couldn't do fractions and she didn't know certain things about how government worked that her sister did, there was a kind of a problem there. Her son was quite smart. It wasn't my son. Anyhow, that's just by the way. Getting back to trust. This is the big problem. We can't trust politicians. With ChatGPT, we realise we can't trust doctors, anyone else. To the extent we did, the trust was wrongly placed, but we gave it because there weren't alternatives in terms of information. The same with tablets. Now, some people still trust their doctor and their pharmacist in the old-fashioned way. I guess I more or less did this until 2 or 3 years ago. I did change doctors on some occasions, but not like I've changed lately. ChatGPT is like consulting another doctor who's pretty solid. It's not always going to be totally right because it doesn't physically examine you. However, it's fairly well on target. You can take pictures of yourself. I've taken pictures of my feet, and it said things I didn't know about my feet, and the doctors didn't tell me about my feet. So we've lost trust in medical people, which is a big thing. But in the end, it's good because AI will give better interpretations than the average GP and better than some specialists. We don't trust government much either. And the move to Pauline Hanson in Australia and her One Nation party is an indication of this. The Liberal Party, which is really a conservative party, and the National Party and the Labor Party have lost the confidence of the electorate. And it was sparked by a massacre of 16 Jewish people at a beachside suburb called Bondi, which is quite world famous, where they were shot by some Islamic father and son who actually came from, well, the father came from Hyderabad in India, and the son was born here but radicalised by preachers, as we've allowed these so-called preachers to say what they like at mosques and assembly halls, because we have free speech, unlike most Islamic countries that don't allow it. I think these father and son have been emboldened by the fact there's been such a strong pro-Palestinian atmosphere in Australia. There was a march over the bridge with, I don't know how many, 100,000 people, but quite a lot of people. And also they were emboldened because there are attacks in Melbourne on a synagogue and some other property of Jewish origin, and the government didn't do much about it. So that's one aspect of trust. Having been a teacher from kindergarten to university, I realised that you can no longer trust the universities to be, let's say, areas of free discussion. People in the humanities area, they have to toe the line with cultural Marxism, feminism, transgenderism. Otherwise they'll fail the course. Universities in the humanities departments have often turned into activist departments. And these departments, education, journalism, are largely run by women. And as I said about empathy, women run more on feeling.
Here we are. I'll leave your cuppa here.
And that's shown up in many ways. Helen Andrews thinks the whole woke culture is really, let's say, emerged out of feminism. We just tended to assume feminism was good. Once it got a bit of momentum, we assumed multiculturalism was good. And things weren't analysed very carefully. I mean, people like Arthur Calwell back in the 1950s and 60s, who was immigration minister and did a good job. He said, look, I don't want Australia to have people from all over the world. I don't think Indian people are going to really help Australia or integrate well. He said, I love India. I'm very interested in the history of India. Robert Menzies said the same. He said, look at the problems in South Africa. He didn't criticise the blacks or the whites. He just said, problems occur when you've got very different cultures. I don't think these people, Caldwell was head of the Labor Party, but he never became Prime Minister, but Menzies was Prime Minister for 15 years. I don't think they were white supremacists. They favoured their own culture. They were essentially saying the cultures won't mix. Certain cultures won't mix. It's just too hard. So now that there's a high cost of living, very high house prices and rents, people are questioning immigration and multiculturalism. And it should have been questioned before. The governments didn't carefully select people to come into the country after 1980. I don't know all the details, but in the 50s and 60s there were refugees, but we were pretty careful who we let in. Now, trust. There's not a lot of trust between men and women, and that's been fostered by feminism, been fostered in the schools. One of the consequences of the elevation of women is that the number of children have decreased in terms of babies of women. And the term toxic masculinity has been bandied about. It used to be chauvinist pig, but these strong terms have only come in the last 50 years. So they've exacerbated the battle of the sexes. We don't trust employment bodies. We don't trust interviews. We know that in certain areas, women get preference even though they're not the best candidate. We know that happens. So, trust is broken down between the sexes in a way that it hadn't before. Now, women needed to get more rights. There's no doubt about that. But now it's gone crazy the other way. Women can do no wrong and men can do no right. Now, when you do this to young men, it causes all kinds of problems. Men have got to have a purpose. Women have got a natural purpose, like having children. And if they choose to have a career, that's a choice. But that they have two positions. Men can't choose to have a baby. That seemed a bit strange to say that. Now, people don't even trust science now, but most people don't understand what science is. Debates in the newspaper and in the media have always been, let's say, strongly influenced by emotion, but it's more the case now because women are slightly more prone to arguing from an emotional point of view. I don't think that's controversial. There's a program on the internet where working class women, who often work in OnlyFans and those type of jobs, come in and answer questions from two middle class guys who are pretty sharp about female thinking, female behaviour, female desires. And it just shows you how out of touch people are. They've asked these women how would they rate themselves out of 10, and although I'm no great arbiter, I think if someone looks to be a 4, but they say they're definitely a 10 out of 10, I'm likely to be on target that they're not 10 out of 10. Why do they believe they're 10 out of 10? I don't know. I think it's a product of us elevating women, plus many of these women probably, let's say, have personality problems, to put it nicely. And because they're young, men tell them anything that will help the man be able to seduce them. And they can't pick what's true and what's not true. That's always been the case, but it's worse now. We always had to beware of advertising, but the advertising, say on Facebook, is just unbelievably fraught with all kinds of problems. I bought something, and the price was exceptionally good. I should have been aware. It never arrived, so I lost $70, which isn't the end of the world. I've photographed other ads and put them into ChatGPT, and just today they said this ad can't be true because it purports to have a photograph from 1800, I think, 2, and it says, well, there were no cameras then, and the product and the actual illness was so debatable. I knew this, but ChatGPT confirmed it in more detail. So we've got to be very wary. And now we have questions that are not necessary in regard to security. I went to Optus the other day, and I said I want to find out what this 187 means on my account. Didn't specify what it was. I had to show them my driver's license. I had to show them my phone. I wasn't withdrawing any money. All I wanted to find out was what the $187 was for. It wasn't going to be for anything unusual. I suspected it was part of a payment for a modem or an NBN module, and it was. Now, being a smart ass, I said to the guy, well, maybe this isn't an Optus shop. Maybe it's a fake shop. Maybe you're a fake employee. Maybe I stole this driver's license. Maybe I stole this phone. But I said, in the end, you were able to tell me it was for a modem. I hardly need to be grilled for you to tell me that. What could I do with that information? That it's part payment for a modem that would be dangerous or cause insecurity in my bank account or society. It's just ridiculous. The guy kind of understood a little bit, but really didn't understand. He was about 35, and he's been brainwashed by all this garbage as well. Some things you do need to provide security, other things you don't. Unbelievable. So overboard with establishing you are who you are. And even then, a smart person could get around it. So there's some thoughts on trust. We can't trust the media at all. Once upon a time we felt we could trust the ABC. We just can't. In fact, if you've got a good brain and your critical faculties, you get better information on TikTok, Instagram and Facebook Reels. But there's lies on there too. But I'm lucky I've done statistics, done research methods at a high level, so I can process this stuff. And that doesn't mean I work out exactly what's fact and what's fiction, but I can think red lights on most items. But even I got tricked, but I suspected the price was so low that there was a possibility that this was a fake ad. But the ABC, we could once upon a time trust more than the newspapers, more than the commercial television, but we can't now. That same thing's happened with the BBC in England. They've essentially gone woke. The ABC is, once again, dominated by women who bring up matters on the news that they're interested in. Marriage equality, or marriage between same-sex couples who were just inundated with it in the 10 years leading up to 2020. It's a matter that needs attention. But there's only a small number of people in this particular position. You know, it's not half the population or anything like that. But women have a concern for the underdog, and they saw these people needing their help. The same happened with the transgender stuff. Small numbers of people getting all this attention. And people have a misunderstanding of how big these issues are. Because they've been on the news and they appear regularly, they think they're widespread, and they're not. Anyhow, I'll just leave it at that. Some ramblings on trust. Thank you.